The 2024 Philadelphia Eagles show that it's not about how you start, it's ultimately about how you finish. Because heading into this season, there were certainly some expectations, right? You expected it to be in the mix, maybe competing with the Cowboys in that division, making the playoffs, and then what happens from there, right? But full truth is, like, the season got off to a start and it was really rocky. They were 2-2 heading into the bye week, and you've got Eagles fans going crazy, calling for Nick Sirianni's head, and skip and whoop-de-woo, right? Overreaction, yes. Eagles fans being Philly fans, certainly, but like, there's some legit criticisms there because this team was not playing well, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. And to me, I typically wouldn't want an early season bye week. I'd rather have it mid or later in the year. It's more appropriately timed, gives you a key week of rest when you might need it more. But for the Philadelphia Eagles, I think that bye week being in week 5 was a godsend for them in 2024 because it allowed them a chance to reassess what they were doing, overhaul their offensive approach, and then say, you know what, we're going to go forward from here. And they did. It came at the right time, and the Eagles maximized their opportunity. They won their next 10 games in a row and final 12 of 13. Like, the only loss they had the rest of the way, outside of that, was that loss to the Commanders, right? And even then, that was Jalen Hurts going down, and the Commanders had to have a furious fourth quarter comeback. They finished 13-4, NFC East champions. Like, they rallied, and now as you got into the playoffs, you're almost feeling like it's inevitable, right? It's going to be them having to travel to Detroit to take on the Lions in the NFC Championship game. Well, what fun that would have been compared to the NFC Championship game we got. But you get into the playoffs, it's kind of like, okay, that defense is legit. Saquon's having an amazing year. But what's Jalen Hurts going to do? If he could be just solid, this team could win it all. But if he sucks at all, it's over. Well, they took care of the Packers 22-10 in the wild card round because thankfully Jordan Love was really, really bad. But it's crazy how even teams that go on to win the Super Bowl, you have games and moments where you're like, it was really close. It was on the line. And that was the divisional round, ironically enough, in the snow against the Rams. It's the LA team that comes into Philly in the snow and sticks a game to you, and you have to barely hold them off to win 28-22. Like, this is the one time in the entire playoffs, frankly, that the Eagles were ever really pushed. They were ever really challenged because the rest of the playoffs, they squeaked by and rolled by comfortably, right? Like, they dominated, but not this matchup. So it's just funny how all of that shit works. And they go to the NFC Championship game, and how fortunate for them. The Commanders went into Detroit the week before and beat up on the Lions. And you had to know, like, the Eagles were going to beat the Commanders, and it probably wouldn't be close. And they did, 55-23. No disrespect to the Commanders, but it wasn't their time yet. It's not their time. It's not a surprise. So the Eagles end up getting lucky, having 3 home playoff games, and riding to the Super Bowl. And boy, did they ride into that motherfucker ready for Chiefs, because they dominated from the start. Like, it wasn't even close. Final score is 40-22, but it felt like the Eagles beat the Chiefs by 40 or more. You look at that game and you say, what made the difference? Well, ironically enough, the Chiefs did a pretty good job defensively of shutting down Saquon Barkley. They just couldn't stop anything else. Right? On the defensive side of the ball for the Eagles, Josh Sweat, I think, had a real MVP case, 2.5 sacks, forced fumble. Like, you can argue whether or not Jalen Hurts kind of got it by default, although I think you could say, like, he kind of deserved it too. But if Josh Sweat would have been the MVP, like, it would have made a lot of sense to a lot of people. But Milton Williams also came up huge. He had a couple of sacks. And just in general, it was that Eagles defensive line that made the biggest difference, along with the Eagles offensive line being able to hold off the Chiefs defensive line, right? Like, this championship season for the Eagles, this Super Bowl championship, is primarily owed to their strengths in the trenches, which is a reflection of the draft approach and philosophy of general manager Howie Roseman for years. He invests heavily in that spot. He continues to invest heavily in the trenches on both sides of the ball. and it pays off massively for this team, and it did in 2024. And Jalen Hurts had a good Super Bowl performance. I don't think it was great or epic or iconic or anything, but he had over 290 combined yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, he was good enough. And he didn't do anything to fuck it up for his team. So in a season that was less than great for him, like he didn't even throw for 3,000 yards, you know, caps it off with the Super Bowl MVP, and you say, man, okay, it is what it is. So congrats to the Philadelphia Eagles for winning the Super Bowl. It was a long journey for them, and early on it surely didn't look like it was going to fucking happen, but they found a way to get it done. And how did that happen? You know, I think it was the signing of Saquon Barkley in free agency, right? Like, in the year of the running back resurgence, Saquon was king. He went over 2,000 rushing yards, and he did it only in 16 games. And just imagine if he didn't have the tush push, vulturing him at the goal line and in short yardage, just how many more touchdowns Saquon Barkley might have this year. But he was tremendous. He was special. This is the type of performance that you say that's why the Giants took him in the second overall pick in 2018, because you're expecting a guy that could come in and do that type of stuff. And man, he was impressive, and he was special this year. And he had a couple of monster performances in playoffs too that really helped to put the Eagles into the Super Bowl. It was also their defense under coordinator Vic Fangio. Like, they were elite. First in yards allowed, second in points allowed. Like, if you can run the ball incredibly well and you can defend, you're going to win a lot of games. And it's kind of interesting, right? In the era of like offense first football and passing game and this and that, the Eagles just won a Super Bowl with a quarterback that threw for less than 3,000 yards. They won with a running back that they paid big money to in free agency that went over 2,000 yards. And by the way, even more impressively, in only a 16-game season. He didn't need 17 games to do. They didn't even play the last game of the season. So it feels like a real legit 2,000-yard season. He did it in 16 games. And then you won with an elite defense. You know, are we seeing a bit of a shift in the NFL? It'll be something to pay attention to, or were the Eagles just kind of a bit of an aberration because they were so great in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and oh, by the way, they had one of the most talented running backs of this era? Like, time will tell, right? But the good thing for the Eagles is, you know, there's no reason they couldn't be back in this spot again. They've got some free agents, you know, like Josh Sweat, Zach Bond, Mekhi Becton, Milton Williams. They probably won't be able to retain all of them, but probably could keep one or two of them, maybe Bond. But if they sit there and say, no, we want to go a different direction, maybe they would be players in the Myles Garrett trade sweepstakes. Certainly possible, right? But they've got some cap space to play with, about $20 million or so right now, and they could do things to free up more if they were so inclined. It's not a bad spot for your defending Super Bowl champions to be. It really isn't. I think in terms of offseason needs they need to address, I don't know if there's needs anywhere. I think it's more of, and the Eagles have understood this really well the past couple of years, right, of you're not drafting for year 1, you're drafting for year 2 through 5, 2 through 8, 2 through 10. You know, so I'd expect them to really go best player available early in draft, and that's exactly what they should be doing. I'd expect some of the focus areas to end up being the like edge rusher, especially if you lose Josh Sweat. You're going to need somebody off the edge. You look at the offensive line, you say right tackle, Lane Johnson's like 35 now. Offensive guard, especially if Becton leaves, do you feel like you have a complement to Landon Dickerson on the interior of that offensive line? It's a fair question. Do you think Tyler Steen is really ready for that spot? Then you look at corner, Darius Slays in his mid-30s. So I know they took Quinyon Mitchell this year in round 1, but they probably could use another guy. But again, like none of these really stand out as striking needs, right? And what would be really scary for the Eagles is, imagine if they had a better quarterback. I'm not trying to shit talk Jalen Hurts here, but he's certainly not an elite quarterback. And, you know, he probably, as I think about it more, I said before he was a tier 2 quarterback. No, he's probably more of a tier 3 quarterback, admittedly. Yeah, he's probably in that 12 to 16 range. So imagine how scary this Eagles team would be if they had, let's say, a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson. Oh my Christ. It's almost like Jalen Hurts being there's a bit of leveling, but, you know, hats off to him. Quarterbacks are defined by wins and losses. Quarterbacks are defined by the championships they won. And in the biggest spot, he played well enough to help his team win, and he's the Super Bowl MVP. So would hope that it would take some of the criticism and pressure off of him. But this Eagles team is certainly one right now, it feels like, that is poised to be a real contender and a force and a threat to repeat next season.